Economists and central bankers lie to us about the economy and financial conditions. And that's not actually a controversial statement. Not only are they dishonest, they believe it's their job to be deceitful. Because they claim special powers on the economy, they believe that any statement they make about it can actually have an impact. I'll give you an extreme example. What if in March of 2007, Ben Bernanke had said subprime wasn't contained? Panic might have ensued. Better to play it confident and not make it worse. Then again, we got the panic and crisis anyway, so what would it have mattered had he actually told the truth, assuming he even knew what the truth was? And by the way, he didn't actually know what the truth was. Another example. Last January, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said, "I am absolutely convinced this will not happen, Germany going into recession." Germany has been in a recession ever since. Were the economists that told him to say that lying to the chancellor? Or were they just all wrong and lying now about the fact that they were wrong? The thing is, we know economists that have anything to do with a government, central bank, or policy absolutely lie. And they do so with impunity and the conceit that they're doing it for the greater good. If I tell you that there's a high risk of recession, there'll be a recession. If I tell you the economy is strong and resilient, maybe you'll believe me and we'll avoid the downturn entirely. Psychology has become the center of everything here. We've seen this huge divide between the public perception of the economic situation, especially in the US, versus what we're being told is the, quote, real situation. I talked about this yesterday with Mr. Van Meter, about how now they're trying to classify any criticism of the economy as misinformation, as if lying to us about the economy isn't. Even some of the statistics seem stellar, but are they? What's the real story? What's the truth? Well, the truth is, economists lie. And as always, you don't have to take my word for it. You can take their word for it. I'll start out here with a working paper that was written for the University of Massachusetts Political Economy Research Institute, by a fellow by the name of George DeMartino. The title of the paper was, "Should Economists Deceive? Prosocial Lying, Paternalism, and the, quote, Ben Bernanke Problem." And he starts out with a few quotes from other economists throughout history, including one from Joan Robinson in 1978. The purpose of studying economics is not to acquire a set of ready-made answers to economic questions, but to learn how to avoid being deceived by economists. After working through all of this pro-social lying and the Ben Bernanke problem, DeMartino says, "In my interviews, I found that economists at all these levels are often in positions where they are pressured or even inclined to generate ersatz economics, often for the public good. Several had stories to tell of their own compromises with the truth and of the behavior of other economists. One effect is that economists do not always or even generally trust the findings of other economists. We see this in allegations by Roderick and Stiglitz, discussed earlier in the paper, related to claims by Freeman and Meyer and many other economists who have called out their colleagues for deceptive practices. In my interviews, respondents warned me never to trust a development industry economist, never to trust a government economist, and as one former member of the Council of Economic Advisors told me, never trust an economic consultant. They all have an agenda and they're trying to push that agenda. In many positions of authority, that agenda is always to make the regime or the current governing body, whatever it may be, look the best that it can possibly look. And there's also this economic theory, this economic idea that by lying to the public, you shape how the economy will evolve. One more quote from this paper from former World Bank economist Ahmed. "What government economists have to say about the economy affects its outcome." There's that conceit. "As a consequence, they have little choice but to restrict themselves to making fatuously positive statements which should never be taken seriously as forecasts." So we have to thank Mr. DeMartino here for exposing what economists on the inside think about the work that many of them are doing. But we all knew this. We all knew economists and policymakers lie about the economy. Again, the Ben Bernanke effect. He's not going to tell you that subprime isn't contained. They're going to tell you the economy is strong and resilient. And one big reason why is this neo-Keynesian theory that recessions don't need to happen. There's no reason to go through a recession. Therefore, we should do everything possible to avoid them. including the psychology of positivity. We'll tell you everything is fine, and if you believe me, because I'm an economist or I'm a central banker, and I've got all the trappings of officialdom and all the imprimatur of excellence and pedigree and everything else, if I look the part and you believe me, fallacy of authority, then you'll act as if everything is fine, and then everything will become fine. The psychology here. And this goes back a very long way. I'm going to reference another paper that was written in 1988 by Brad DeLong and Larry Summers. It's called How Does Macroeconomic Policy Affect Output? And what they were basically saying is that, again, there really is no reason for a recession. Policymakers should strive to do everything in their power to make sure that recessions don't happen. They called it filling in the troughs without shaving off the peaks. Let me read to you from the introduction. As a way of comparing the effectiveness of different demand management policies in stabilizing national economies, we return to the much-discussed comparison of macroeconomic performance in the United States and other industrial nations before and after World War II. Previous explorations of macroeconomic performance in historical perspective have focused either on the volatility of output about trends or on the volatility of changes in output. But volatility is not the relevant measure if, as Keynes and the early Keynesians believed, successful macroeconomic policies fill in the troughs without shaving off the peaks. As they say, recessions are temporary deviations from trend, and because the trend remains regardless of the recession, why bother having the recession in the first place? If you don't need to go through a recession, don't do it. Do everything you possibly can, including lie to the public about how things are, in order to fill in the troughs. Because if you don't shave off the peaks, then what's the point of having a recession? Going back to DeLong and Summers here, though, they say this improvement in performance in the U.S. economy relative to potential is conventionally, and we think correctly, attributed to the more stable financial system, automatic stabilizers, and possibly improved discretionary macroeconomic policies that together make up the post-war Keynesian institutional order and have managed demand for the past 40 years. They're making a couple different assumptions here. Because what they're saying is before World War II, from the Great Depression moving backward, the U.S. economy was all over the place. Economies all over the world, and the same thing. We experienced these periodic and all too frequent depressions, really serious economic downturns. So something changed. After the Great Depression and World War II, now we get at most these mild recessions that don't lead to the types of long-run consequences that the Great Depression did. And so trying to explain what changed around, say, the middle 1950s, they keep coming back to the automatic stabilizers, which is government spending, aggregate demand, using Keynesian theory, as well as discretionary macroeconomic policy, so basically government spending. But they also note that other one, more stable financial system. Because 2008 kind of scrambled all of these theories, didn't it? Because that wasn't just a big recession. As DeLong himself, as well as Larry Summers said later on, this was more than just a big recession. Something big failed. And this is something we talked about before. Economist Stock and Watson back in 2003, coining the term Great Moderation, said basically the same thing. Not about the Keynesian macroeconomic policies. What they said was, something seems to have changed. We don't have the periodic and all too frequent financial, really monetary disturbances that we used to have. We don't know why that is. And so what the 2008 crisis showed, that those other things that Summers and DeLong were talking about in 1988, those demand policies, the idea that we can fill in the troughs, well, without the cooperation of the monetary system, it doesn't work out so well after all. When the Eurodollar was working, they said the Keynesian techniques were working well. Then the Eurodollar stops working, and now nothing seems to work. And as nothing seems to work, the more they have to lie to you, because that's the last tool in the toolkit that they can depend upon. The automatic stabilizers didn't stabilize. The discretionary macroeconomic policies didn't lead to any kind of recovery. They're not fixing the financial problem, which is really a monetary problem. So we're going to lie to you and tell you everything is fine, and maybe you'll believe it, and everything will turn out to be fine. Like I said, you don't have to take my word for it here. As far as the 2008 crisis goes, again, Brad DeLong himself in 2014, He saw that the economy wasn't recovering, and he didn't call it the silent depression as we do. He called it the lesser depression. Because by 2014, it was absolutely clear something big and permanent had changed. Though he didn't put his finger on the Eurodollar system, which he should have, he at least recognized the macroeconomic consequences. And so too did Larry Summers, his co-author. Summers in 2014 and 2015 called it secular stagnation. Same thing. It's the lesser depression, secular stagnation, silent depression. But what they are missing is that first piece of the puzzle. More stable financial system, monetary system. As the Eurodollar system was working, things appeared to be stable to the point that even governments were taking credit for their policies for that stability. And it wasn't the case. Once the Eurodollar stopped working, so did those policies. But now, of course, like I said, they have to lie to you about everything. Like the former World Bank economist Ahmed had said, that was quoted in DeMartino's paper, as a consequence, they have little choice but to restrict themselves to making fatuously positive statements which should never be taken seriously as forecasts or just taken seriously as anything. Again, secular stagnation, silent depression, lesser depression, whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing. It's not recovery. But yet that's all we hear, strong and resilient economy. Doesn't matter what the numbers are, the economy is always strong and resilient until many years later they go back and rewrite, or at least try to rewrite history. Last summer, the Bank of England asked Ben Bernanke, of all people, to conduct an extensive, exhaustive review of the Bank of England's policies and procedures to see what has gone wrong with the Bank of England's monetary policies. Because in the context of the pandemic age and consumer prices, not a whole lot of people are okay with the performance of the Bank of England. And that builds upon the decade before when the performance of the Bank of England was also questioned. So the Bank of England continues to do these series of reviews every about 5 years or so to say, hey, why do we keep screwing everything up? And asking Ben Bernanke to conduct this review, it's like the fox guarding the hen house here. But he published this report in last month in April of 2024 that blamed, get this, the most serious problems we found in our review are the deficiencies of the bank's forecasting infrastructure, the tools the staff uses to produce the quarterly forecast and supporting analysis. Some key software is out of date and lacks important functionality. With the staff fully engaged in the production of the current forecast, particularly during periods of extraordinary volatility, insufficient resources have been devoted to ensuring that the software and models underlying the forecast are adequately maintained. You believe this crap? Now they're lying to you about how they've been lying to you. What Bernanke's saying is the Bank of England's forecast and performance has been so bad because they're running the central bank equivalent of Windows 95. They're not putting enough investment into their computer systems. It's just the easy way out. But again, we expect central banks and we expect people like Ben Bernanke to lie to us about this because they have to project this image of credibility to maintain their macroeconomic and Keynesian toolkit of being able to lie to you. We were wrong about everything because we didn't invest as much into computers. So now we invest much more into computer and software. You can now trust everything that we say, even though we're going to lie to you even more. That's how ridiculous this all gets to be. But it has to be that way given the circumstances that we find ourselves, this lesser depression, silent depression, secular stagnation. It's all the same thing. We have to lie to you about the situation in order to maintain the chance that we can get out of this by lying to you even more. And the funny thing is, former Bank of England governor, the head of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, who led the Bank of England during the 2008 monetary crisis and its aftermath, who consistently said that we're getting our way through, policies are working, just give him more time, just like Ben Bernanke did. In 2019, Mervyn King came clean. This is what he said in 2019. No one can doubt that we are once more living through a period of political turmoil, but there has been no comparable questioning of the basic ideas underpinning economic policy. That needs to change. Conventional wisdom, it's not really conventional wisdom, this is what central bankers have been telling us, attributes the post-2008 stagnation largely to supply factors as the underlying growth rate of productivity appears to have fallen. Yes, they blame American workers or workers outside the U.S., too drug addicted, too lazy to go back to school. It's not our fault, not our policies. But as King said, The data can be interpreted only within theory or model. And it is surprising that there's been so much resistance to the hypothesis that not just the United States, but the world as a whole is suffering from demand-led secular stagnation, the silent depression. And once you realize the silent depression or the lesser depression or secular stagnation, then and only then can you go back and start looking at the causes. And the causes were not that they didn't lie to us enough about the situation. It's not psychology. There are real world monetary and financial problems that can't be fixed with happy talk. It actually has to be done on the ground level. But see, that's the thing. Economists and central bankers in particular don't even know where to begin. So as we hear in the United States in particular, strong and resilient, strong and resilient. And if you criticize the economy, it's misinformation. After all, haven't you seen GDP? Well, as DeLong and Summers were writing in 1988, is quarterly variation in GDP really the correct standard of measurement? No, it's not. If we have an economy or an economic situation that, say, needs 8% growth and it gets 5, such as the third quarter of last year, 5% sounds terrific, and people will lie to you and say 5% is great, but if you needed 8%, it's actually not good. And that's what we see with GDP in the United States. Some of these quarterly numbers look good, but when you put them in the context of the trend, as they were talking about in 1988, you can see that we're falling further and further and further behind. Yes, 5% was awesome. It was stellar in the third quarter, but it was not an example of a hot economy. And they lied to you telling you that it was. All you need was a little bit of context. Same thing with the payroll report. 300,000 monthly payroll gains sound terrific. But if you need 500,000, 300,000 is inadequate at best. They lie to you about that. As I mentioned in a recent video, we are 4 million payrolls short of that the 2010s trend. Not even the pre-2008 trend, where we're 23 million short. Just the 2010s trend, the establishment survey, the best picture of the economy and the labor market, 4 million short of the 2010s trend. So 300,000 a month, that's not a good number. That's nowhere near adequate. Same with the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is, well, it used to be around a 50-year low, but not only has it ticked higher, it also doesn't take into account the participation problem. So they lied to you by focusing on the monthly changes in the payroll report. Say 300,000 is great. Well, is it? It depends upon the context. GDP looks absolutely stellar in these certain quarters, but only when you don't compare it to its trend or baseline, as they were doing after 2008. And only many years later do they come back and say, yeah, you know what? It's all stagnation. It's all secular. It's all depression this and depression that. At the time, they tell you everything's great. It's robust. It's strong and resilient. It is not a controversial statement to say that central bankers and economists lie. They do it openly, and they do it for what they claim is your own good. There's no reason for recession, and they believe that every tool in the toolkit, including psychological manipulation, should be used to avoid it. Doesn't matter how wrong they are. Doesn't matter that the forecasts are ridiculous. Doesn't matter that they lie about their forecasts being ridiculous. Yeah, we just need to update our operating system. It does not matter. They're going to continue to tell you that everything is fine. The entire premise behind calling economic criticism misinformation is quite blatantly to continue to allow them to lie unopposed. Evaluate the evidence for yourself. Draw your own conclusions. Don't depend upon the fallacy of authority. That's what they're really hoping for, that you believe that Jay Powell knows what the hell he's talking about, even though Jay Powell 10 years from now will probably say, as he's getting a Nobel Prize, yeah, I was lying about everything. At least when it comes to financial conditions in 2024, central bankers can't lie about it because there's so little information. Nobody really knows what's going on. But we did get an update, a little bit of information, and I went over that in the video link below. As always, I thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And until next time, take care.